Now, these 4 frames are simply ways of looking at a situation. So let's go to the next slide. The 4 frames is from a book of Bowman and Gallo. In fact, this is the book right here. And it's a leadership book of talking of institutional change within academic settings. But there's some practices here that I strongly identify with, which is why I wanted to show these with you. For leadership to try to change in an institution, there are ways within an institution that you can look at something. And I'm going to go through those 4. And after I'm done with that, we can now open the floor for a general discussion. So a structural frame is building clarity and capacity. The leader is the institutional change architect, and that doesn't necessarily have to be one. It can be a leadership team or what have you, but realize that this comes from the lenses of leadership book. So change architect, systems designer, or coordinator of the pieces of who emphasize policies, roles, lines of authority, and internal and external alignment. So when you're looking at an organization through a structural lens, let's just say that I was looking at your organization, I would say, okay, what are the protocols, what are the policies, and what are the mechanisms that you have in place under the vein of broadening participation? And those could be like, what are your policies for promotion? What are your policies for hiring? What is your interaction? Like, let's just say that you had, let me ask in the room, is there any Latina on staff? Okay, thank you. Because I hate saying something that was like, what is he talking about? He ain't one of me. No. But let's say you have Latina and she's new to the organization. We had an instance that was a very big learning event for me some years ago. My mother used to be deputy chief of Chicago Public High Schools. And she wanted to help me with our recruiting efforts. So we were trying to bring more diversity to Fisk University. And so we invited a bus full of students from various Puerto Rican schools in Chicago to come down and do a visit of our campus to see if they'd be interested in coming to our university. And we ended up attracting anywhere from 8 to 12 students. But by the second semester, only 2 of them wanted to stay. And what I learned in that was, it's not just bringing in students to our university and saying, here, you have access to everything that we have access to, because they felt culturally isolated. They didn't feel a part of the body because there weren't symbols and things on our campus that really appealed to their culture. And I felt so bad because it was something that I wasn't aware of, but we weren't aware of it because that wasn't a population that we normally serviced. So so that part of our structural framework was, if we're going to recruit students of various backgrounds, then we have to be darn sure within our infrastructure that we have things in place that are going to make them feel welcome, that are going to make them feel at home, and you're not playing lip service to it. So that's just a given example of where the structural frame of looking at our university would have done us a great benefit. So now I'd like to go to the next frame, which is the political frame. Looking at things from the political frame, respecting and managing differences. The leader is a compassionate politician who works with an intensely political aspect of an academic life as an advocate, negotiator, power broker, and strategist, engaging in agenda settings, bargaining, building conditions, etc. Now, so if you're looking at an organization through a political lens, then you're saying, okay, what about the politics of our organization could be enhancing or inhibiting broadening participation? I can't think of a really good analogy off the top of my head, but if I could encapsulate it, at least it's saying, okay, if we're talking about politics, let's just say, well, you want to bring in a person who, I know one from my own university. I had 2 professors. One was Dr. Mu, who was from China, and Dr. Ueda, who was from Japan. And I remember when I was a graduate student here, I admired these guys because I was a graduate student at Fisk. They were really cool and everything. But then one day I saw you went to lunch with Dr. Ueda. And I said, yeah. And I said, I'm kind of ignorant here, but do you all still have maybe bitter feelings because of World War II? And he said, the conversation has come up, but that's kind of behind us and we get along great. And I thought that it was interesting because what he highlighted in his conversation is that they had a conversation about it. Because if there was any animosity, then that would have been a very political thing that I would have had to navigate in the department. Because if I worked with one person and I worked with the other, I'm going to have to kind of speak in a certain way so that I don't offend someone or piss somebody off because, hey, why are you working with him? I don't like him. So that's a matter of looking at something through a political lens of how it could inhibit or enhance a given organization as it pertains to broadening participation. If we could go on to the next slide. Let's see, I'm moving mine. The human resource frame. Now, looking at things from a human resource frame is kind of, okay, what are your selection process for hiring? And are there things embedded in a selection process that could enhance or inhibit broadening participation? Or do you have let's say you're having an initiative and you have several people that are working on it. And from a human resource standpoint, if you're looking at a key situation, do we have in our practice including people in this project that is conducive to a broadening participation lens? Is it, well, we selected these 4 people to go to this thing to give a talk. And you might have just been like, well, I work very well with these individuals, so that's why I selected them. But you might have that was your comfort level, but you may not have thought, well, hey, we have the new person here. Why don't we bring them along so that they can at least see what we do? And that's a mild example, but you see that it's kind of a human resource because you're talking about how you're utilizing your personnel and engaging in your activities. And so the last frame is the symbolic frame. And when I learned these frames, I realized that this was the one that I actually struggled with because symbolism is a matter of perception, and sometimes it was hard for me to see the symbolism in something. So I'll give you an example of a symbolic frame. I was talking to a mentor of mine about I was overloaded. This semester, I teach 2 classes that are overloaded. And there was a 3rd class that someone wanted to say, well, we need someone to teach this class. It happened at the last minute because we have a bunch of students and they need this to stay on track to graduate. And I said, well, I'm already kind of packed, but okay, I guess I'll do it. Then the mentor said, well, why did you accept the class? And I said, well, they needed to graduate on time. If I didn't teach the class, that might affect them. And she kept going, say that again. I did it because they needed to graduate on time. Why do they need to graduate on time? Well, we have a policy that we try to get our students out in no less than 5 years. And then she said, you don't see what I'm trying to point out? And I was like, what are you getting at? The fact that you are trying to adhere to those students getting out in 5 years is symbolism. There's nothing that makes them graduate in 5 years, but it's symbolic that you adhere to it. And you're looking at those students through a symbolic lens because there's nothing that said you had to do it. And I was like, oh my gosh, never thought of it that way. Because the symbolism is I, as a faculty member, trying to work for the greater good of us trying to adhere a policy of getting our students out in a certain amount of time. And it just so happened I was the only person that teaches that class. So either I took it and they did it or I didn't. So those are the 4 frames. And by the way, I present those to you as just a best practice that you could be looking at your organization. There are other frames, there are other best practices, but this is one that I thought I would present to you just as a lens of the different ways that we can look at an organization to assess, in this case, broadening participation.